So, who was Edward Bach? He was a medical doctor. He had trained conventionally and he was working in the emergency room treating the casualties of World War I. He had quite an intense job. He went through the Great Spanish Flu of 1918, again, as a conventional medical doctor. But even then, during that period, he started to ask some deeper questions about health and disease. He was feeling was that there must be something more. And so he wanted to look to nature and especially to the plant world to see if there were alternatives in the plant world. And that's when he started to make trips to the countryside that he loved. And he spent a lot of time with the plants. So it's said that he could feel the energetic properties of the plants, and he would take a flower petal and he would put it on his tongue, and he would feel what that flower could heal. Or he would hover his hand over the plants, and it's like he knew, he had an embodied sense for what they could heal. So let's go to how did Bach make these remedies? Well, there were two different methods. They're called this.
Hello, homies, and welcome back to Homeopathy Hangout. And today we get to hang out with the lovely Linda Nurra from California. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Eugenie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So lovely to have you on because I don't know, somehow we've managed to get through 400 episodes and we haven't done a single one on the Bach flowers. Like, I don't even know how that happened. Crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you are going to be telling us a bit about that, but you probably know the drill by now. Always ask my guests to let me know how you were first introduced to homeopathy.
Well, it's a similar story how I was introduced to homeopathy and Bach flower remedies. So I'll kind of weave it together. So I was born and raised in the middle of the Mediterranean on a beautiful island called Sardinia, Italy. And from a pretty early age, I was familiar with this idea of the special medicines, the folk medicines, the herbal medicines that the people knew about. And I remember as a young child, I would love to listen to the elders when they told stories about these special medicines. And I also had the good fortune of having a family friend who was a pharmacist, an herbalist, and generally a natural medicine expert who took me under her wing. And so I remember as a young child, I was just a little girl and I would go with her to her pharmacy and to her herbal shop. And she would take me to the hills and teach me about the plants. And so this was like very much a part of my life. And when I was in college, by that time, she had founded a school of natural medicine there in Sardinia, Italy. And she was connected with all the most, I would say, visible, most important movers and shakers in natural medicine in Italy. And this included homeopaths and herbalists and flower essence therapy experts. All those people were there and they were coming to teach at her school. And I sort of got to tag along and sit in for free. So I took all these courses. And to give you a sense for the kinds of people who were showing up here, we had some of the top homeopaths in Italy. One of them, Dr. Elio Rossi, has become quite well known today. He ended up being the person responsible for bringing homeopathy into the Tuscan healthcare system, into the hospitals in homeopathy. And he's done some amazing clinical studies that have been published and have had a lot of attention worldwide. And so it's like I was sitting in on all of this, trying to take it in. But I was a college student studying literature. And so I thought, it was like having this experience like, wow, this is so amazing. But well, I guess I don't get to do this because I took another path. So a little bit of kind of this feeling of longing and curiosity was there for me already. And one of the people who showed up to teach there was a woman from Milan. She was a psychiatrist and psychotherapist who specialized in psychosomatic medicine, and she also practiced Bach flower therapy. And mainly, she was treating her patients with Bach flowers. And I just want to underscore how remarkable this is because it's probably a little challenging today to find a psychiatrist that's treating with flower essences. You can imagine,
Unbelievable.
right?
Unbelievable.
Okay. It was fantastic. And so I had the opportunity to sit in on her classes and get to know her. And at the end of this experience, my mentor, my dear herbalist mentor friend, gifted me a Bach flower remedy kit. And that was probably the most precious gift that I've ever received because that kit followed me for the rest of my life. And it was, in a sense, what she gave to me was this ability to care for myself, to become aware of my inner state, and to become self-reliant as I was moving through all the painful and bumpy and awkward stages of growing up into adulthood. So that's where really the journey began for me, actually becoming empowered to use natural medicines myself. And homeopathy came later, and it came at this later phase where I was working through some physical health issues, and I really felt like I hadn't made headway through with other approaches that I had used. And I worked with a homeopath for a short period, and before you know it, I was enrolled in homeopathy school at the School of Homeopathy, and it all unfolded from there. But ever since I came to homeopathy school, I started to ask the question of what is the relationship between Bach flower therapy and homeopathy? And what, if anything, do they have to say to each other? I had had some mentors and supervisors who had kind of poo-pooed it when I brought it up, my homeopathic mentors. And then I had heard that there were other homeopaths who were using Bach flower remedies and flower essences in general with great success. And so this really became my passion project to work this out. And out of this project came a number of courses and educational materials. And, this is really, I have to say, this is where my heart is right now. I've done and I continue to do other things, but this is really a very special area of work for me and also just for of personal development and for what it brings to me personally. So that's what got me here.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about this with you today and reach more people, perhaps, and inspire them to discover this beautiful modality.
Like I said, I don't know how we got through 400 episodes without one on Bach flowers because there are loads of homeopaths that use them. And one of the fun facts that I learned in homeopathy school was about Edward Bach, who started the Bach flowers, that he first worked with poo and then he went to flowers because, of course, we have the amazing bowel nosers, which, he pioneered that work. So I kind of know it from that angle. And I've never delved into the Bach flower essence myself because there's just so many other things with homeopathy. And I use some Australian bush flower essences. And I just seem to resonate, with them a little bit more. But I keep on seeing it being recommended everywhere. And of course, we all know Rescue Remedy, and there's, a few really well-known big Bach flower remedies that most people will be familiar with. But maybe before we dig into them a little bit more, can you tell us a little bit of the history of Edward Bach and how he came about? And how he
Yes.
came about this discovery.
Oh,
Although I
there's
can
no
imagine after working with poo, flowers would be a nice alternative.
Right. Well, what I want to say about Edward Bach is we really have to credit him with being, I would say, the modern founder of flower essence therapy. And he's the person who really created a system, a usable system that was handed down to us today. The working with flower essences is actually an ancient practice. And we have evidence that ancient peoples created versions of flower essences and used them for therapeutic purposes. It seems the ancient Egyptians used to work with the dew on the flowers. And because they believed it had special healing properties, or we know that Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century German abbess and mystic and herbalist, used to have the nuns collect the dew on the plants and use it therapeutically. So these are early traces of this idea of these essences, this water that's vibrationally charged and that's infused with the special properties of the plants. And there are more examples and there's more to this story. But we don't really know if Edward Bach knew about all these examples. There was someone at the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital when he was working there by the name of Robert Thomas Cooper, who was thinking about something similar. So before Bach started working at the hospital, and he had passed away by then, but what he did was he intuited something very special about flowers, and then he systematized it and handed it down to us. And so, what we can say about him, and so it's a long story, and I wish we had time to tell the whole thing, but I'm just going to kind of synthesize
Do you
the
cover some
story.
of that in your course? Like more,
I do.
you
We
do? Oh,
cover,
good.
we go in depth. I mean, he's such a fascinating character, and he's really, I think he was quite a complex man. And most of the stories that we hear about him are kind of sanitized, it's kind of like the scrubbed version. But there's just so much that's interesting that, once you go down the rabbit hole and you look into his life, you can discover it's really extraordinary. So, who was Edward Bach? He was a medical doctor living in England in the beginning of the 20th century. He had trained conventionally and he was working in the emergency room treating the casualties of World War One. He had quite an intense job. He went through the Great Spanish Flu of 1918, again, as a conventional medical doctor. But even then, during that period, he started to ask some deeper questions about health and disease. And he noticed that different personalities, different people healed or failed to heal in different ways, right? And he was trying to understand what is happening here. What is the role of the mind and the emotions and the personality in health and healing and also in disease, in the creating the process of disease? And it wasn't until he got a job at the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital that he started to have some answers. And he had a framework, he had a model for thinking about this. And he was able to move from this, the materialism of the mainstream medicine of his time into a more vitalistic and holistic way of thinking about health and disease. So he had already been studying intestinal bacteria. And so his research had begun. He continued to develop it within the homeopathic context. And that's what really brought us the birth of the bowel nose oats. I like to say, in a sense, he's not sufficiently recognized for being one of the pioneers of microbiome theory. We're all talking about the
Yeah,
microbiome today.
absolutely.
And his work was fantastic. And I would really say he was one of the people who started to look at that connection between intestinal bacteria and chronic disease and to notice some correlations and also notice correlations with the mental and emotional states, right? So, really, really big, important contributions to homeopathy. But it seemed to not be enough for him. Part of this, I believe, was coming from his own healing journey. So he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer years before. He had been told that he had only 3 months to live. And now, fast forward a number of years, and he was still alive, committed to doing his work. But I think also what he was feeling was that there must be something more, that this work with the bowel nosodes wasn't giving him all the explanations and all the solutions that he wanted. And so he wanted to look to nature and especially to the plant world to see if there were alternatives in the plant world. And that's when he started to make trips to the countryside that he loved. And he spent a lot of time with the plants. So he would, it's said that he could feel the energetic properties of the plants. And he would take a flower petal and he would put it on his tongue and he would feel what that flower could heal, right? Or he would hover his hand over the plants and it's like he knew, he had an embodied sense for what they could heal. And so from there and through this process, he developed a way to kind of harness that energy, to gather up that energy in these spring water infusions. So, and this brings us to how are these remedies actually made? Because I think
Mm.
it's worth talking about,
Yes,
right?
please.
This is
Thank you.
very different from homeopathy. Okay. Both Bach flower therapy and homeopathy are vitalistic, they're holistic, they treat the person and not the disease, right? They look at the mind body system as one unified totality. But the remedies, the way that the remedies are made, the way that they work, and the way that they're used in clinical practice are profoundly different. Okay, so let's go to how did Bach make these remedies? Well, there were two different methods. They're called the sun method and the boiling method. And I'll talk about the sun method for a moment. It's really the most poetic and lovely one. So imagine Bach is out in nature and he's in the countryside and he's studying the plants and paying attention. So Bach would look for the plants and the flowers when they were at the peak of their bloom. They're sort of the blossoming, the peak of their bloom, because Bach believed that the flowers at that peak stage contained the highest healing frequency of the plant, right? Sort of, it's the highest, most evolved potential and expression of the plant's being. And that he related to the highest expression of human potential, human spiritual potential. So he believed that there was a difference, if you made the remedies with the flowers versus making remedies with the leaves and the roots and the branches, right? We know in homeopathy, we can use all the parts of the plant and often do. In homeopathy, we don't have this focus on the flowers, right? But Bach said there's something very special about the flowers, and he could actually feel it in a tactile or sensory energetic way. So he would take a glass bowl and fill the bowl with spring water from a nearby spring, preferably. So we're looking at, the living structured water coming out of Mother Earth. And he would gather up the most beautiful, healthiest looking flowers from different plants of a certain kind, and he would float them on the surface of the water. And then the bowl would be left out in the sun for something like 3 or 4 hours. And through this process, the water, the sunlight, right, the warming rays of the sun and the frequencies of its rays would essentially charge the water and infuse the water with the energetic imprint of the flowers. Okay. And in flower essence therapy, we say this is the living life force of the plant, right? Because that's the other piece. It's the plant is harvested, and in that moment, the flowers are laid into the water. There's no delay. We don't use, dried flowers. We don't wait. We don't put them in alcohol and then make the remedy later, right? There's this idea that we're like tapping into the living energy of Mother Earth through the plant and infusing it into the water. And Bach discovered that these remedies were very powerful. And so he spent a number of years, well, it was about 5 or 6 years before he passed away, testing his intuitions and using the flowers with all the people that he worked with in the English countryside and managed to gather some good amount of data, right? And also have confirmation about his intuitions. And there was another method that he also developed for creating the flowers that doesn't use the sunlight, it uses heat. It's called the boiling method. But essentially, so we have this period of time from about 1930 to 1936 when he passed away that he was testing and refining and then writing up his discoveries for us. And so we have a good 80 plus years of clinical practice where practitioners have confirmed Bach's early intuitions. So we have practitioners who are simply flower essence practitioners trained in flower essence therapy that are working with these remedies today. And we also have other practitioners who have easily integrated this work into their other practice, right? Whether they be Chinese medicine practitioners, massage therapists, or also homeopaths, we see this. The two modalities, homeopathy and flower essence therapy are so compatible that it's just a wonderful tool to have in the toolkit. Um,
Amazing. So you can have it as like an adjunct for these various other modalities or as a therapy by itself. Can you use it for like a massage therapist? Would you ever add it to an oil or is it only taken orally?
Absolutely. Many massage therapists use these remedies. There's at least one book that's on this topic. So if anybody's interested in that, they can look it up. And I don't know that I would blend them with an oil, though I suppose they could be. We're looking at an alcoholic tincture that may or may not work well with oil. I don't have experience with it, but they can certainly be used on the body to release emotional and physical blocks or to promote a sense of relaxation that
Hmm.
can, enhance that process of massage.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of ways that they can be used. And that's what's so nice about them. It's the versatility of
I'm
these
going to sound
remedies.
really ignorant now because, like I said, I use the Australian bush flower essences and they've got various room sprays. Are there like Bach flower essence room sprays and things like that as well?
Yes, people have made them. And this is one of the things, it depends whether you kind of practice in a very conservative, conventional way, or you want to explore other ways to apply and deliver the remedies. But absolutely, I'm going to show you right now. This is a flower essence bottle that I've made up for myself. And you can also, the two most common ways, right? You have your dropper bottle and you can just use the drops, or you can just mist the essences in an environment or on the body. You can add them to the bathtub. You can add them to creams and lotions. There are a lot of ways that you can administer them, which I think it makes it a very user-friendly modality. There's not a lot that you can do wrong,
So not a
you
lot of
know?
contraindications. Like, is it pretty safe, would you say, like with homeopathy?
Yes. So the Bach flower remedies are absolutely safe and non-toxic. And there are really no contraindications. They can be used by anyone, all ages and demographics, pregnant women, newborns, the elderly, those with, medical conditions, sensitive medical conditions, all of that. They're really beautifully complementary also to any other kind of treatment, and that includes mainstream medical care. So that's quite lovely. They also don't produce side effects. They're non-addictive. They don't create provings
Oh,
or
wow.
proving symptoms, right? I mean, that's pretty extraordinary.
That's amazing. So no aggravations or anything like that.
Nothing like a homeopathic
Okay.
aggravation. So
Mm.
they're actually, because they work on a different principle, and we can talk about that in a minute, but they're not capable of producing a proving of any kind or proving kinds of symptoms. So also no homeopathic aggravations. What you might sometimes see is this. So these remedies help to harmonize our inner life. And that means our emotions, our thoughts, right? Any areas in our mental, emotional being where we are stuck. We haven't moved through or processed an emotion. And so, what can happen when you begin to take the remedies is that things start to move. And for some people, that can be a little uncomfortable, right? Imagine if you've learned to bottle up your anger your whole life because it was not safe to express that anger. Or you've bottled up so much sadness and grief that you weren't able to express, right? And so, what these remedies will do is they will start to bring movement, they'll start to create spaciousness. And sometimes this needs to move through, it needs to come out. And so, people will say, that the tears started to flow, or maybe the anger had to be expressed. And so I would say that's more of the framework through which we think about aggravations, if that's what we want to call them in flower essence therapy. We usually don't see some of the other things. You don't really see
You're not going to get
much,
like headaches or flu symptoms or anything like that, or like
not
loose
typical.
stools. So it'll be more like just suppressed emotions that will just, yeah, which is all part of the healing process.
Yeah, it's part of the healing process. Yeah.
Quick question. If there are no provings, if it doesn't produce proving symptoms, where does the materia medica come from?
Yeah, that is a great question. I love that you asked it. So it's interesting to think about this because we know in homeopathy, the discovery of remedies is a very rational, linear process, right? Hahnemann told us how to do provings, how to gather the data. And now we know that all kinds of wild and amazing and nonlinear and magical things happen in a proving, but the process itself is very linear. Bach discovered his remedies through an intuitive or empathic process, right? That's where the original discoveries came from. But then he confirmed those discoveries in clinical practice. Okay. And we do that
That's
in homeopathy.
important, that grounding in clinical practice, because you can have all the intuition you want, but it needs to be clinically applicable. And that's something that I'm so passionate about. And clearly it
Yeah.
is because it's been used for decades and there is lots of clinical evidence. So I was just playing devil's advocate, but
I'm glad you did because, our listeners will be asking the same questions. And so it's the clinical practice piece. And now we know even in homeopathy, we have provings and we have clinical practice. We verify the proving information in clinical practice. And so, for those of us who are a little bit, again, more rational and we want to be grounded in something like a proving, it might take a little bit of a leap, but we do have almost 100 years of clinical experience of teachers and practitioners writing materia medica and confirming Bach's original intuitions. And, since Bach, the practice of flower essence therapy has grown, right? And so we have people like Ian White making the Australian bush flower essences. We have,
French
the
shell
North
in New
American.
Zealand as well. I didn't
Yeah.
yeah.
Tell me about them.
Oh, there you go. I actually have one here. Free advertising for French shell. The New Zealand First Light Essences. They do flowers, but they do seeds and other things as well.
Beautiful,
Mm.
beautiful. I'll have to look
Did
into
you
them.
say
Thank
there's
you.
one in North America? I've heard there's orchids as well. Like there's all sorts of flower essences.
Yes. In North America, we have the Flower Essence Society, Patricia Kaminsky and Richard Katz that have made beautiful remedies from the California flowers. We have the Alaskan essences, and people have made flower essences all over the world. And, when those are initially made, we are working with that same kind of process. There's also plant observation that goes into this process, but usually they're considered research essences until enough information has been gathered and confirmation clinically. has been had. And then those start to kind of, that information gets shared and we have a clearer sense
Mm.
for what each of those remedies is for or can be
You've
used
just
for.
given me such a good idea that I reckon every new remedy, homeopathic or essence or otherwise, that is made needs to have research essence on the label for at least the first 5 or even 10 years so that people, because you have to have that. Sorry, this is just like a little bugbear that I have at the moment with things not being rooted in clinical practice. So I will just calm myself. But I think it's so important. And when you were saying about Bach starting in 1930, I was just thinking, oh, that's coming up to 100 years now, which is amazing. And is it still just the original ones that he's created? Have they added more? And how many are there in total?
Yes. So there are 38 Bach flower remedies that are individual remedies. And then there's the combination remedy, which is rescue remedy. That's what most people would call it. And that's a combination of 5 different flowers. So the Bach system is a closed system in the sense that no new remedies are being added to the Bach flower remedies. And that was Bach's wish. He really had this sense that he had completed his work and that the system was complete. And I have to tell you, you can do an awful lot with that little kit of 38 plus one remedies. I mean, there are practitioners who can work with that kit their whole life and never need another flower essence. And it sort of depends on your temperament, whether you decide, no, I'm going to look into Bach flower remedies because that's enough. I mean, I work with just my little Bach flower kit for the first 20 years of doing this work and never felt like I needed to look beyond. And it's only been in about the last 10 years that I felt the need and the curiosity to explore some of the other remedy collections that we have around the world. So, but you can
Amazing.
do so much. And again, I just want to encourage people to be curious. And you don't have to be a homeopath to use these remedies for yourself and your family. Bach wanted everybody to learn how to do this for themselves. This is this very powerful medicine of self-reliance. That was his idea. He wanted everyone to have a kit to learn how to make the remedies and just to use them. He said there's this one phrase that it's just, it's mentioned a lot, but he said, I want it to be as simple as this. I'm hungry and I go and reach for a lettuce from the garden. I'm afraid and I reach for the mimulus remedy. It's like you can really make them a part of your life. And they're so easy to learn. They're so easy to use. You can't really make mistakes, you know? I mean, even if you get it wrong, meaning you're not sure, you're just trying, it's a very forgiving system of remedies, and it's a forgiving, I would say a forgiving modality. And so that's why I just kind of want to encourage anyone who's curious, maybe you've used rescue remedy and that was helpful to you, just to maybe look into branching out and do a little bit of research, maybe even purchase a small kit and start exploring for yourself. They're really beautiful
Beautiful.
in this way.
And is it mostly just for emotional things or are they physical things as well? And to what sort of level do you feel that they heal? Like, is it something that you take once and that's it? Or is it like a ongoing, is it just like a plaster or does it actually get to the root cause?
Yeah, great. So, all right, the first thing I think I want to begin with, that starting point of this is a vibrational or energy medicine. It's a subtle medicine. It's not a material or molecular dose of active principle, right? And it's sort of in itself, it's not a material physical medicine. Okay. So the way it touches us is on this subtle energetic level, much like homeopathy. Okay. Working on this subtle plane. And typically, we start to see effects in the mental and emotional sphere. That's right. And we are also prescribing these remedies based on mental and emotional indications. However, we know that we are one being, we are an integrated totality, and people will often report that their physical symptoms have gotten better.
Well, I'm probably a good example because our lovely listeners would have heard that my voice is not sounding what it normally has. And I've had some things happening and I couldn't talk about it. And I had to keep it quiet for a period of time before I could say something. And I was taking remedies. It wasn't helping. My voice wasn't getting better. And then just before this podcast interview, I finally had the conversation I had to have. So, but I wonder, like, in a case like that, the voice is gone, but I know it's because of psychosomatic reasons. So I'm thinking if I had some Bach flowers to, the shock and everything else that will suppress, I think maybe if I had some Bach flowers, then that probably would have helped my voice come out. So I might have to chat with you about some Bach flowers afterwards.
Yes, yes. It's a beautiful use. It's absolutely
Hmm.
a beautiful way to use them. And, I think I mentioned my original teacher, she was an expert in psychosomatic medicine, and she used these remedies also through that lens to help people work through physical issues that weren't moving any other way with these remedies, right? So we're not prescribing based on the physical issue. Okay. It's not like this remedy for this physical ailment. Okay. We are looking at how that person is feeling in themselves. But through that, we can often, in those kinds of physical expressions, we can find a key to shifting those symptoms. So,
What's your best Bach flower remedy for shock?
oh, yeah. Okay. Well, this is a great question. I want to say
Maybe
that
suppress anger as well.
anger and shock and all that. I
Uh,
have to say, we are at a time where I just feel like the whole world is having a kind of these experiences of big and little shocks, right? I mean, we are exposed to so much, not only personally, but just in terms of the collective, right? So most people know about Rescue Remedy. And, we'll talk about it for a moment. I can just say that there are two ways to approach a shock in Bach flower therapy, right? One is you say, okay, in the acute crisis moment, reach for Rescue Remedy. Now, this is wonderful because it's so simple, and Rescue Remedy is available in just about every health food store around the world if you're lucky enough that you can get hold of it, and you can do so much with just that. Rescue Remedy, though, is really an acute care remedy. It's like in the moment, what it will do is it will bring down the stress. It will bring down the crisis and fight or flight response, right? And it's like it turns down the volume on the crisis. Okay. So you kind of come back into yourself. Okay. And it can really give this feeling of like soothing the shock. One thing I tell people, spray it on the body. Some people feel shattered in their heart area. So take and spray it over the heart, or you can spray it on a part of the body that hurts, in a physical accident. You can spray it around an area where there's been an injury. So we can use it in that way. And it's also excellent in shock when the person shuts down, right? Most people use it during the freak out phase. It's like, oh, I freak out, so it'll calm me down. But it also has this, it will down regulate or up regulate. Okay. So sometimes people go into that, it's that arnica state. It's like they're in shock, they're kind of shut down,
mm,
right? They're not freaking out
mm.
visibly, but they're like shut off. Some people go unconscious. And so Rescue Remedy can help to bring us back online.
Actually, I'm just thinking of all the mums with birth trauma that have had, mutilated just about during the birth process and had all sorts of procedures pushed upon them. And then they come out of there and they have this baby in their arm and like a, deer in the headlights, just stunned. And
Yes,
yeah, that's a,
yes, it's like shell shocked.
mm,
And this brings me to this other remedy, though, because this is where it gets, I think, really powerful.
mm,
One of the remedies in Rescue Remedy is called Star of Bethlehem.
mm,
We have this remedy in homeopathy. It's called Ornithogalum umbellatum. It was a remedy that was used in cases of stomach cancer by Robert Thomas Cooper, but we've learned a lot more about this remedy since then. And it's a very powerful remedy for trauma, including the trauma of birth. So it's often used in the case of babies. They come into the world, right? And, it's like there is a shock, a unique, I mean, there's a universal shock, right? That, the human baby, that any baby coming to light experiences. It's a change, it's a new situation. And so Star of Bethlehem's been found to help kind of babies come into themselves, come back into the physical body, especially after highly medicalized births that involve separation from the mother or, unusual physical pain and so on. But Star of Bethlehem is really for any kind of shock, trauma, bad news, heartbreak, heartache, your high school breakup, it's like the heart feels broken and there's this sense that something's been shattered and everything hurts and I can't eat and my stomach's closed, right? And there's this comfort that it brings into the heart. The remedy's been also been called the liquid hug
Oh,
because it
that's lovely.
that kind of a comfort and it can do that very quickly in those situations. Okay. So again, you can think of that remedy not only for like the big things, the loss of a loved one or an accident or a scary diagnosis, but also just for all the little shocks, all the bad news. We're on our phones all the time. How much bad news are we taking in? And some of us are really suffering in deep grief over that bad news, right? So that's the other part
Mm,
of this. It can really soften and comfort the
mm,
grief that can come from all these experiences that
mm.
we're facing. So really quite beautiful. There's so much more to say, but I love that you asked about that particular topic because I think so many people are needing this right now.
We're obviously recording this the day after, or 2 days after Charlie Kirk's been assassinated, and this is not going to come out for a month. So it makes me, I actually almost wish that we can drag this episode a little bit sooner because there's a lot of people that are going to be in shock right now. Have you got some specific, like a specific remedy advice? Is this still the same one that you would recommend, or is there a different one that you would recommend? Because even though this is coming out a month later, there's still going to, I mean, the shock's not going to go overnight. People are going to go through various stages of grief and shock and anger probably as well. Maybe just as a collective, this is going to come out 1 month after this event's happened. For people who are, like, well, what sort of remedy, what sort of Bach flower advice can you
Yeah.
give them?
Yeah, I would really say that Star of Bethlehem is a very profound remedy to address the core of that shock. So that should probably be I would include that at the
Mm,
base of formula for this experience. And like you mentioned, everybody will process this differently, right? Some people will go into fear and anxiety about the world not being a safe place. So that's one of the things that can happen. And we have remedies for fear and for terror. Rock rose is an important one for extreme fear. It's the kind of fear that can make you panicky, that can give you a panic attack. Rock rose. It's like, think about it's the flower version of an aconite, okay, when these things happen. So that's an important one. But there's also a related remedy that's about when that big, intense fear, maybe it doesn't look so big. It's like this daily anxiety. It's this state of general fearfulness about being tentative, about being in the world, just this fearfulness in a general sense. Sometimes people feel afraid to go out. People might feel afraid to be out on a college campus or to be out at a big event. Those are some of the ways. Then there's the anger, the big anger. And what's beautiful is that we have in the system, we have different remedies for different kinds of anger. One of the things that's going to come up now, and that's already coming up, is the anger at the injustices in the world. Okay. Wherever you land, whichever side you land on of all these debates and questions and conflicts, right? This idea of there's a right and a wrong, and I'm so angry and I'm so fired up and it's so unjust. And I want to go out there and I want to fight the injustice, right? And that remedy is vervain. Okay. What happens with vervain is vervain can be a very constructive and positive force in the world. But when we become so dogmatic, when we stop listening to each other, when we make the world into a black and a white, meaning everything's black and white, or however we might understand that, right? That's when we stop seeing truth, right? And that's where a lot of these conflicts come in. And so vervain can help us to kind of come back into ourselves and from a greater place of presence and curiosity and listening to be with other people who may have different ideas and be able to listen and perhaps agree and perhaps disagree, but then take constructive action to move forward in the world,
Sounds like
right?
that needs to be sprayed from the planes instead of the the stuff that they spray on us at the moment. Sounds like that needs to
Genius.
be sprayed from the planes. That sounds beautiful.
Genius. Yeah.
Mm,
Again, those are just a few. There are so many ways that we can help people. We all have a very different response, but there's really so much that you
mm.
can do to soothe the heart of the world
I hope it's
with.
okay to use that as an example. I just get this sense that the fallout of this is going to have repercussions for a long time to come. And if we have a tool that can help people process this better, then, I feel it's worth talking about. So thank you for mentioning. And, obviously these remedies are applicable in any, area, but I just know there's going to be people that are really going to be hurting for a long time from this. And we've got something safe and gentle. It's got no side effects. It's non-addictive. Why wouldn't we tell them about it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
There was something else that you mentioned. That's right. It's just, can you make combinations with them yourself? Because you said you might want to use Star of Bethlehem, but then you might want to. So it sounded like you could add other things to it.
Yes, absolutely. So, we know in classical homeopathy, it's the single remedy, it's the minimum dose, right? We have all these principles that are, we sort of try to be pretty faithful to. And here we can make combinations. And so you can generally, we advise you mix up to 6 or 7 remedies. And you can either put them in your glass or you can prepare a little dosing bottle, right? You add them to some water and maybe a little preservative, though that's not needed. And you add the drops, and then you just use that blend, you use that mixing bottle to take your blend throughout the day as often as needed. So the other part of this is the as often as needed,
That's
right?
just going to be
When
my question about dosing. Like, how long do you give it for?
yeah. So, well, how long do you give it for depends on this kind of state. Is it an acute or is it a chronic, long-standing pattern? So, in an acute, you can take it as often as needed until that acute passes. Could be a few doses, a few days, usually up to a week. In chronic or long-standing conditions, you kind of want to see how things go. Usually, I would reevaluate on a blend after about a month. And then maybe you continue to take the blend or you modify the blend or you take a pause. So I would say, unlike homeopathic remedies where we're often giving one dose and then it's like, goodbye, I'll see you in a month. Here, there's this more, we kind of have a daily relationship with the remedies. And we can also decide when and how often we're going to take them.
I
We
imagine it's
usually
probably one of those where you'll just like forget to take the remedy when you don't need it anymore, or forget to take the
Absolutely.
essence. Yeah.
That's exactly what
Mm,
happens. It's pretty frequent that it happens that way. And so, what I want to say is, I also, there are different ways of using these essences. Like, again, we could just use them in these acute high stress moments,
mm.
but we can also move into chronic care where over time we are working on repatterning all our old conditioning. Okay, going all the way back into childhood. So it's not just the recent traumas, it's the childhood traumas, the patterns, the behaviors that we learned to cope and
Mm.
survive as children.
So if you keep
And
going back to like having bad like abusive relationships or things like that, you can use that to break a pattern.
yes, absolutely. They're wonderful helpers in that way. And I'll share with you, these are part of my spiritual practice, these remedies. It's like we can use them to very consciously support ourselves in this beautiful evolutionary way. It's like, who do I want to become? Who am I becoming? And what do I need as support to step into that with greater authenticity and courage? And that's what's just so lovely about this work for me. I mean, it's just it's very soulful work.
Mm. You have completely convinced me. Where do I sign up for your course?
Ah, how exciting. Well, I'll tell you. So actually, I have a course that's coming up for homeopaths specifically. That's coming up. It's called Bach flower therapy for homeopaths. And I start that the next cohort in January. And so I have that course on my website, insighthomeopathy.com. And really what we're doing there is, homeopaths are working together to try to understand how to incorporate this modality either into their homeopathy work or alongside it as an additional service offering, which can be helpful because not everyone is ready for homeopathy or, willing, or sometimes they tell us they can't afford it or whatever it might be. But also how to use the remedies for ourselves, to build capacity for ourselves as homeopaths, because there is so much that we hold in our work. As we're holding the space for our clients, the presence, the deep capacity to listen and to be with another human being in their suffering it's a big job. And so, how can we use those remedies to build our own ability, our own resilience, so that we can be better homeopaths and serve people better? So, those are some of the things that we do in the course. There's a lot more, but yeah, I welcome any homeopaths who are interested in exploring this together to take a look or contact me if they have any questions.
Amazing. I see here so insighthomeopathy.com, and the practitioner certification course starts on January 14th, 2026. Amazing. Well, I can tell you're an incredible lecturer. The way that you're speaking and your passion just comes through. I just know this is going to be a lot of fun. It's amazing. How long does the course run for? And how's it
So,
structured?
yes. So the course runs for 6 months, but the first 3 months are really the intensive part of the course. It's 12 weeks of weekly sessions, 2 hours and 15 minutes a week.
Hmm.
And that's where you really get the core of the curriculum. And we
Okay.
cover history, philosophy,
Hmm.
clinical methodology, the materia medica, the applications within and outside of homeopathy, and all of that. We look at a modern theory of emotions or a modern approach, a biological evolutionary approach to emotions. So we're kind of bringing, Bach's old language and worldview into the modern age, into the 21st century, and to see how can we freshen up this work and make it relevant to the kind of language and framing that we use today. And so that's what we do in that first half of the course. And then we take another 3 months to process and digest. Because I don't know about you, Eugenie, but I have taken so many courses where I got all this information. I was so excited. And then I went on with my life and did other things. And it was lost. Like that feeling like, oh gosh, I have to go pull out my notes and I have to restudy. And the goal here is that we give processing time and we come back together monthly. We give people a chance to test this out, to come up with their questions and really refine and make this their own. And then we work through, and that's what the second half of the course is all about. So the idea is to have you feeling like you can hit the ground running and you can really make this a part of either your personal life and or your practice if you choose to.
I love that you're holding space for them at the end there as well and helping them integrate. You're right that I feel like that is the missing piece of a lot of courses. That's really great that you're doing that. And your website is beautiful as well. So for our listeners, go check out insighthomeopathy.com. And thank you so much for today. I know that it's going to help a lot of people, looking for some answers, some different modalities, or, just I've got a lot of home prescribers as well. Maybe just, I mean, I think the idea of 38 Bach flowers being a closed system, that's not so overwhelming because a lot of the others, they keep on adding new flowers. So I do like that idea of it being around for almost 100 years. And you've got a closed system, you learn those, you become a master at it, and you can do amazing work with just that. So that's a
Yes.
good selling point,
Yes.
that one.
Yes, and I just want to say I talked about this course for homeopaths that's already scheduled. I
Mm.
offer courses for the broader public. We don't have
Oh,
one right now, but I really want to make a suggestion for anybody who wants to learn more. The kits, the little kits are pretty affordable. You can go and research, but get a kit. And there's one book that I'm going to recommend.
mm.
It's called Bach Flower Therapy, Theory and Practice by a German teacher, Mechthild Scheffer. And it's a tiny little book, but this book is wonderful for anybody, practitioners and non-practitioners. So if you want to go learn, get that book, get yourself a kit, or maybe you can, build up your kit a little bit at a time, but you can really just do so much even with self-study. There are a lot of free
Awesome.
resources on the internet, and I want to encourage everybody who just resonates with any aspect of this to go and explore and find out if it's something that's for you. So.
Love it. It's been so fun getting to know you because I've had some of your other, colleagues at Prometheus Institute on the podcast as well. So it's been lovely to get to meet you as well. And I really appreciate your time and the generous way in which you shared today. So for that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.